The thoughts and ideology of Jyotirao Phule. Introduction. Jyotirao Phule is considered the founder of anti-caste movement and the founder of the peasant movements, women's liberation movements, and others. He is a powerful, iconic figure who is remembered for his revolutionary thought and ideology of all. He was also an organizer and activist, the founder of Satya Sodak Samaj, which became the main radical anti-caste organization of Maharashtra, spreading in villages as much as in cities and carrying on campaigns throughout the state. Phule and the Indian Renaissance. It is important to see Phule and the movement he founded not in isolation but in the context of the general colonial system situations and the efforts of Indians to respond to it. In Maharashtra, Brahman and non-Brahman social and political activities developed parallel to and influenced by one another as well as by the pressure of British rulers. Police organization, the Satya Sodak Samaj, was founded in 1873, only 7 years after the founding of the most influential elite Bombay province social reform organization, the Pratna Samaj, and about the same time as the primary North Indian reform organization, which was to develop an equivalent mass base, the Arya Samaj. Similarly, though the non-Brahman movement did not become a mass movement until the 20th century, for that matter, the national movement itself did not develop a real mass support even among more elite groups until uh, the 20th century. Its formation parallel that of elite political bodies. The Satya Sodak Samaj was founded only 2 years after the Maharashtra first political organization, the Pune Sarvajanik Sabha, and some 12 years before the Indian National Congress held its first session. Similarly, the Satya Sodak newspaper, Deen Bandhu, brother of the poor, was established in 1875, 8 years before the most important Brahman nationalist papers, Keshari and Maharathu. Clearly, then a process of mutual influence was at work. The beginning point of this process was the Indian Renaissance. This is the term applied to the efforts of the first generation of Indian thinkers under the colonialism to come to grips with the challenge represented by the West and the seeming backwardness of their own society and culture. With the rootless self-criticisms, they sought to lay the ground for a total social reformation to wield science and rationality of Indian culture to recreate India. For this generation, Jyotirao Phule and his thought stand forth first as an expression of first generation Renaissance thinking. The Jis generation, however, was succeeded by one more concerned with the alien source of new ideas than with the errors of old society. Underlying this change was the solidification of the British colonial rule after the middle of the 19th century, which ensured the development of a narrowly based elite drawn from the upper castes, feeding in through the educational system to the British bureaucracy. Colonial rule thus ensured the power and the status of the elite, making them concerned about threat from below to this status. At the same time, it made them restively aware that they were, after all, serving an alien bureaucracy, but as subordinate, not rulers within it. Henceforward, however much they spoke of Hindu traditions and the Indian nations, their thoughts and action expressed the interest of the class and not of a whole people. Hence, they opted as elites do, not for a revolutionary social transformation, but for modernizations. In other words, a devitalization of the old society. Their identification was an elite of education and knowledge, as upper castes with the Hindu cultural system, as the modern intellectuals concerned about the scientific and industrial progress of India. Hence, they developed a ideology with sought to be use and revitalized Hindu tradition as the spiritual and moral center around which the liberal modernism of West could be grafted. Eastern morals and the Western science. They accepted the Aryan theory of race, which had the implication of the identifying them ethnically with their British conquerors rather than the majority of their fellow countrymen, which traced civilization in India from the Aryan conquest and which gave a new pseudo scientific justification for the caste hierarchy. And they developed an economic theory which looked to the capitalist development of India freed from the destructive bonds of British imperialism. Therefore, they opposed foreign exploitation without considering the exploitation of workers by native capitalists or peasants by landlords and lower bureaucracy. But the majority of Indians were dark skinned non Aryans. The majority of Indians in traditional Varna terms were Sudra. The majority of Indians were peasants and had no hope in the near or distant future of becoming members of the bureaucratic elite or capitalist, small or large. The liberal modernization of Indian culture and the capitalist development of India and did not speak to their interests. Peasants, tribals, workers, low caste untouchables were all adversely affected by the colonial regime and responded like the upper caste elite with both renaissance and rebellion. But lacking access to education, lacking control over the media of communication, their renaissance and their rebellion, their ideology and organization remained in more incipient, crude, localized, and incomplete form. Nevertheless, it may be said that the Jyotirao Phule, the low caste, non Aryan peasant masses of India came to consciousness. To discuss Phule's thought as a peasant ideology, it is to stress that he was not an adjunct to all the other social reformers of the 19th century, but represented a very different set of interests and a very different outlook on India from all the upper caste elite thinkers who have dominated an awareness of both Indian foreign intellectuals. The elite expressed an ideology of what may be called the national revolution. If we decline nationalism as opposition to Western colonial rule and remember that it was nationalism of a class combining bourgeois and high caste traditions. Phule represented the ideology of social revolution in its earliest form, where the peasant and anti-caste outlook was so as its primary enemy that every elite. Fulle's thought represented the fulfillment of the Renaissance desire of the social transformation along revolutionary lines. In sociological terms, it makes good sense that he, rather than later and more widely known elite thinkers, should be seen as the primary Renaissance figure. Any culture, after all, rests upon class society and the dominance of the particular class, and the total transformation of the culture requires the destruction of this dominance. In terms of India, Hindu culture and the caste system rested upon Brahmanism, hence Phule, who aimed for the complete destruction of the caste superstition and equality, linked his thought with the movement of the opposition to the Brahman elite. Non-Brahmanism in India therefore represents not simply communism as or a result of British divide and rule policies. It traces its origin to the Indian Renaissance and represents the first expression of the social revolution in India. Background: by the first quarter of the 19th century, India had been under colonial rule for a sufficient period for it to become established. At colonial rule did not destroy the old feudal caste system, but rather strengthened it in some ways. Agriculture was subordinated and devoted peasantry toiled the lands after losing their lands to the money lenders. Uh, Brahmins felt the bureaucracy being the main group to take advantage of the educational opportunities the British offered. Their dominance was felt by all the subordinate castes. The Sudras, peasantry, remained at their prey, cheated for religious ceremonies and priestly greediness. The anti-Sudra Dalits were mainly agricultural laborers and the performers of the Bait Begar, carrying out caste or obtained tasks such as carrying away dead cattle, beginning or organizing beginning of organization. Yet a few from subaltern castes could make it into education. Of these, one was the young Jyotiva, who studied in the Scottish Mission School in Pune. Born in 1827 as the son of a Mali gardener, he was given initial education in the mission school, then withdrawn apparently at the instigation instigation of a Brahman who argued that the education was useless for a non-Brahman. He returned to school in 1841, a period in which he began to teach his young wife Savitri Bai how to read and write. In the school, he evidently made the acquaintance of his first Brahman friend, as we go one day, and was influenced by the mission teaching by Thomas Paine's Right of Man, by the lives of George Washington and Shivaji, and by ideas of freedom for India, stimulated partially by local revolts of low caste coolies and Ramosis. However, his attention quickly turned to the social reform, partially through awareness of the problems of untouchables and the partially by an incident of personal insult, in which he was invited to the marriage, began a career marriage ceremony of a Brahman friend, and then told by one of the Orthodox to leave. After his graduation, he began a career of social reforms, including founding a school of untouchables boys and for girls. Orthodox pressure on his father forced him to leave his home at the time and support himself. He did so, making his life living as a contractor. And in spite of incidents of the caste prejudice, the early period was nevertheless one of the cooperation between the Phule and the Brahman reformers. In 1849, he supported the petition of liberal Brahmins to change the Dakshina Prize Fund into one of the prize of Marathi books, and form of his support was a significant index of the nature of Brahman non-Brahman relationship for when the reformers were threatened by the Orthodox Jyotirao Phule with a group of about 200 men from the untouchables locality provided them with mass production. This situation occurred again in 1875 with the visit of Dayanand Saraswati to Pune. Again, Jyotirao and the low caste provided mass support at the time. At the same time, Brahmans reformers provided significant help to his girls' school established in 1845, 1851, and 1852, with Savitri Bai as a teacher and for a school for untouchables in 1852. Fully's educational efforts continued until about 1858-60, but by this time the pressure from the Orthodox was growing. As liberal Brahman support gradually ceased, Fully's positions began to harden, and he increasingly drew his backing Rome, a growing community of non-Brahman merchants and the contractors, many with roots in village. Many visited Mumbai, and in 1865 he published the second edition of Padval's Jyotived Vivek Sir, and in 1869 he himself wrote a long povada or narrative poem or Shivaji depicting him as the protector of the peasant. Though this was submitted to the Dakshina Prize Committee, it was rejected for Brahman compositions which portrayed Shivaji as the patriotic leader against the Mughal. Finally, the Brahman Orthodox power began to consolidate. By the 1870s, Fulle's disillusionment was complete. He rejected his schoolboy nationalism as a product of Brahman influence and turned his attention to full-scale social revolt. The Satyasodhak Samaj. In 1873, Phule formed the Satyasodhak Samaj, which backing from some well-to-do non-Brahmins, primarily contractors and a few professionals. The Samaj were to carry on religious ceremonies without Brahman priest and to educate both sons and daughters. The Samaj remained a major agitating social organization for many years after that. Its center of gravity was in the village. Peasants, cultivators such as Maratha, Kunvis, Malis, Kolis, Dhangars all played a prominent role. Malis in particular were represented out of the proportion to their numbers, partially because Phule and such colleagues as Krishna Rao, Bhalekar, and Narayan Lokhande were of this caste, and initial relationship of caste provided an important point for communication of Satyasodak's message. Artisans and low caste were also important members of these village organizations. For example, 46 names listed among the Ahmednagar C contributors of 70 villages to the Satyasodhak Samaj Fund in 1915. There is one Kulkarni, one Simpi, one Teli, one Chambhar, over Mahar, or two Dhangars. The response of these non-cultivating castes is also indicated by the fact that leading activists after Phule's death, those who wandered through the villages propagating the movement, including a Sonar, Bhimrao, Mahamuni, a Gosabi, Dhyangiri Bho, a Kumbhar, Pandit Dhandiram Namdev, as well as Marathas from Azar, what of untouchables. And one sense, Satyasudha Samaj was an organization directed mainly at carrying broad and radical reforms to large mass of Fijians. Untouchables did not traditionally use Brahman priests. At the fight against untouchability was crucial to equalitarian work of the Samaj as fighting Brahmanism. Not only Phule, but almost every important Satyasodhak leader had a clear record in this area. Most important untouchable leaders before Ambedkar were supported by Satyasodhak leader. Papers like Deen Mitro directed articles to them and responses and articles written by them. Thus, among three Satyasodhak meetings in Pune in 1896, one is recorded in Maharwada and the Bhalekar.